Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
The federal government is shut down, but the national parks, most of them anyway, are open. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. Back during his first term in office, President Donald Trump also kept the parks open during the government shutdown that stretched from the end of 2018 into early 2019. That led to some vandalism to the parks and damage to some park resources. How are things going this shutdown? To explore that question, our guest today is Kristen Brengel, the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with the National Parks Conservation Association. We'll be back in a minute with Kristen to get her take on things.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Kristen, welcome to the Traveler. It's great to be talking with you.
It's always great to be here, Kurt.
You know, we're just past 2 weeks into this government shutdown. We keep hearing optimism that the Republicans and the Democrats will come together, and the optimism is quickly tossed out the window. How is this impacting the national parks? I mean, the national parks have stayed open. What are you hearing? We've heard the reports of base jumping in Yosemite, and not a lot else of what's going wrong or right in the parks.
It's really interesting. I've now watched several shutdowns, so we do have some past, situations to compare it to. But essentially what this administration decided to do was use and exhaust fee money to keep park staff available in the park. So every park is very different right now. There's about a quarter to a third of parks that are closed just because they are closed at night, and the policy is that if they're locked, they stay locked.
Sure.
So that's the case for, somewhere in that 25 to 30% range. And then the other parks, it's all different. From what I'm seeing, some parks are very minimally staffed right now, which means, they're playing a little bit of a risky game in terms of making the park open and available, but not really having enough people to manage the visitors coming to them. And then there are other parks that are surprisingly staffed. And for those parks, when I check in with superintendents, they're spending down their fee money, and they have quite a lot of staff. And it's because they have high visitation right now in October, because it's a beautiful time of year to visit parks. And some of them have serious security issues and safety issues, so they have to keep staff on the ground. So what's going to happen, and you know this as well as I do, is that when you exhaust that fee money, that means some of the construction projects and programs that you were going to have next year, next summer, are not going to happen. That fee money is just going to get wiped out. So, and this shutdown there's no end in sight for it. So this is just going to go on for weeks and weeks. So it'll be interesting to see if some of these parks actually want to continue to use that much fee money to stay open.
I was just in Yellowstone last weekend, or yeah, kind of in Yellowstone. I was working on a project, and because parks research staff had been furloughed, the researchers were not allowed to work in the park. So we were actually outside just to the east of Yellowstone in the Beartooth Plateau. But I stayed at Mammoth Hot Springs, and when we came into the park, there was a ranger in the entrance booth. And I understand that they were not being paid, but it was to let visitors know that we are here. As we were driving through the park one day, there was a black bear on the loose, and of course, that created this jam of people. And almost immediately, I don't know if they were volunteers or rangers, showed up to manage traffic and until the bear could get off the road and move on through the forest. And I've heard that one of the strategies might be that the administration wants to show that these parks can be open and be safe without the Park Service full complement there. Is that a concern?
Absolutely. We know that the parks are not able to be managed well. Overcrowding has been a concern in parks for such a long time, and having fewer staff is not good for that. We saw pictures coming out of a few parks over last weekend where people were parking on the side of the road at Acadia, Great Smokies. It was just sort of like that chaos that starts to happen when there's no one helping visitors figure out where they should be. And really what we've seen even from the summer is that the resource staff have been working on visitor services instead of their actual jobs. So we'll start to see the cracks show up in so many parks as the resources get less attention, maintenance gets less attention, and really the staff that are around are mostly trying to manage visitation. So yes, I think the administration is trying to prove that you can do this with fewer people, but those of us who know how the parks are run know that this is unsustainable and this is safe for park visitors. And so this is just an accident waiting to happen, as my mom would say.
What about some of the smaller units? Is this an opportunity for the administration to say, well, we've got to save money wherever we can, so we're going to shut down this unit and that unit and the other unit? I recently was in Kansas, and I went to Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, and I visited Nicodemus National Historic Site. Pre-small parks, as the Interior Secretary might say, they're cost centers. So should we cut those down and divert their money to some of the other parks to keep them running?
Another publication, not the Traveler, did a great article on Nicodemus, and I believe it was the mayor of the town who said, even though the park site only brings in a couple $100,000, that's important tourism dollars for the town. And so I think this is where the administration really struggles with their messaging, is that even those smaller sites are really critical to local economies and to the fabric of communities. And so I think they may want to make a case that these parks should close, but I think they will get a big fight from the locals and from, the historic preservation community and the parks community that love these places.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. And the Traveler did do a great podcast from Nicodemus, and we've got a film coming.
Wonderful.
So
I'll look forward to it.
keep your eyes on it. Yes, absolutely.
It's a great story.
Nicodemus?
Nicodemus is a great story, don't you think?
It's a very interesting story. And there are so many nooks and crannies, if you will, of the national park system that have interesting stories. And it'd be a shame if we lost many of them.
I think we have such a possibility of losing African American history in this country And I think one of the great stories that I heard about Nicodemus was how, when it was designated, Senator Dole at the time cried at the ceremony designating the park site. So it just shows how much people love history and how bipartisan national park units are, that just people feel so attached to them. And I think even though Nicodemus is small, it's mighty.
It's mighty small.
And it's mighty small, but absolutely
But
worth keeping in the national park system.
definitely some interesting history there. So, Kristen, along with talking about some of those smaller units and the struggles they could have down the road with whether the administration wants to get rid of them or not, and some of the issues that the larger parks are having. Research, as I mentioned a little while ago, outside researchers can't do research in the parks because the park research staff isn't there to coordinate with them. Any idea what we're losing in terms of research? I mean, it's only been 2 weeks, but still.
Yeah, I think we have been struggling to get some of those numbers to find out how many folks we've lost through all of the efforts by this administration to push out staff. We do know that, for instance, the Alaska Regional Office lost a few inventory and monitoring people. And so we know many of these folks are gone in parks and in regional offices, and we know it's going to hurt the Park Service's ability to fulfill its mandate to do inventorying and monitoring within parks. So at the end of the day, it could get pretty dangerous if some of these researchers can't continue their work. One thing we worry about, and I may have mentioned this before, landslides in Alaska. If we don't have people monitoring that situation and researching it, it could become a very dangerous situation up there. Air quality monitoring, we are so concerned about water quality monitoring. We know the Park Service has lost a bunch of these folks, but we just don't know the degree to which they've lost these folks. And we don't want to be in a situation where we don't know water quality and water quantity in the parks. That would be really bad for health and safety, but also recreation.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering about you. You've got your Park Service researchers, inventory and monitoring, and then you've got those outside researchers like is it Michigan Tech that's been doing the wolf studies at Isle Royale for 50
Yeah.
some years, and I'm guessing that they have been interrupted by this government shutdown.
We also know that there was a list of grants that different universities were getting federal funding for that were on the chopping block to get cut. And so we do not know if the money has come through for some of those university grants. But yeah, there was, I went in and talked to Senator Tillis's office in North Carolina because three of the universities there were getting money on storm surge issues. And look at what's happening at Cape Hatteras right now. You have
Yeah.
house after house falling into the ocean in the last couple of weeks. And that just seems like a really bad decision if they went ahead and canceled those grants at the universities in North Carolina. So, like you're pointing out, the parks are interwoven in this larger system of research and monitoring that goes on. And every step of the way, these folks seem to be thwarted in terms of doing this work. So that would be terrible if those universities in North Carolina were not funded to help out, because if folks have not looked it up, the pictures of Highway 12 that runs through the various Hatteras Islands, they're trying to push the sand back off of it. And it's a disaster right now.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's been a long-standing disaster, and I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, they don't know other than push the sand off of it.
I mean, they've been doing that for a really long time, but the tenacity, the repetition of storms that have come through in the last couple of weeks have been really, really bad and very emblematic of what they're going to be facing for years to come.
Yeah, and they've been relatively minor storms, true. I mean, tropical
Yeah,
storms, not full-blown hurricanes.
right.
Although we still have another a few weeks left in the hurricane season. Furloughed employees. We keep hearing the president saying that he wants to fire the employees. There was a judge's ruling this past week that you can't fire them right now. What are you hearing about that?
So right now there's a temporary restraining order, and that holds for at least 14 days. And in the meantime, the unions that sued will continue to pursue keeping that injunction or restraining order in place. So we hope they succeed, and we believe the agencies are hurting right now and should not be allowed to reduce staff and terminate staff anymore. So we're hopeful that they will succeed. On the bad side is we have heard that all summer long, the Interior Department has been working on a reduction in force or mass termination. We even heard that it's about to happen next week. And it could be devastating for not just national parks, but other public lands, wildlife refuges, BLM lands, Bureau of Reclamation, and so forth. And so we're hearing that this mass termination can be thousands of interior staff, including the Park Service. So what I keep asking myself, what is the point? The Park Service has lost 4,000 staff people, permanent staff people, since January. What point are you trying to prove by getting rid of more staff? And my understanding, and I've been sort of waiting for this, is that they may be focused on the folks who were consolidated back in May. And for those who aren't tracking this closely, back in May, Interior took 5,700 people out of each bureau, or they took them out of all the bureaus. So 5,700 people, and put them under DOI instead of their.
By bureau, you're referring to the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, et
Right,
cetera, BLM.
right. So they took 5,700 people out of 9 agencies and put them all under the umbrella of the Interior Department. This is the order that Burgum wrote, that he said, we're going to consolidate staff, and I'm going to put Tyler Hassan in charge of everything and give him full control over the situation. And that's when there was that big explosion of, why is Burgum giving up his job and handing it over to this Doge person, so on and so forth. A lot of media was done on this. Those people who were consolidated, those 5,700 people, have been in limbo for months now. Some of them didn't have supervisors assigned to them. They were just told their email address is now whatever their name is at doi.gov. So my suspicion has always been that they're going to go after these people first. These are folks who work in IT, HR, communications, workers' comp, financial services, contracting. The Park Service alone generates $1.6 billion for concessioners. If you get rid of the contracting staff, you are going to hurt those businesses. You get rid of the communication staff, you're going to get rid of the frontline people who communicate with the gateway communities, other agencies. You get rid of the IT people, you hurt the dispatchers, you hurt the fee collectors, you hurt general communications inside and outside of the agency. Losing these people would not be good for the Park Service. But why? Why would you get rid of these critical people? Why would you get rid of your IT people who are keeping your park functioning? Burgum keeps talking about it. Burgum keeps saying that he wants to get rid of these folks. This is going to really hurt the Park Service and the other agencies in a huge way, and it's going to cut them off from the communities. So I know I've been talking a lot, but the other thing about this that I think is crazy is that Burgum put out a secretarial order saying that he wants to appoint one person per bureau to work with gateway communities. So You're literally going to kill the ability to communicate with these gateway communities by getting rid of the staff who do it. So none of this makes any sense to me, Kurt. I think this idea of a mass termination that they're going to continue to pursue is absolutely going to continue to hurt the Park Service and the other agencies. I think it's ill-conceived. I think as this goes on, as we see them continue to hurt these beloved federal agencies, I just really hope Congress starts to stand up to these folks, because these are their constituents that they're firing. And I think the other thing that Burgum is trying to sell people on is that these are DC-based people. There's nothing wrong with DC people. I'm one of them. But he keeps casting it this way. I have seen where these people live. They're spread out all over the country. So, and in very red states, Alaska, Idaho, you're going to hurt people all across the country if you go through with this mass termination. And so, but apparently it was supposed to happen next week. But now that this injunction is in place, it probably will get pushed off. But I think it's still going to happen.
This is Kurt Repenchek with The Traveler. We're talking today with Kristen Brengel, Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the National Parks Conservation Association. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Acadia National Park, to a young boy, was an incredible wonderland, especially to a young boy who grew up in central New Jersey and whose summer vacations typically involved a stay at the seashore for a week or two. Acadia presented me with tree-covered mountains threaded with trails to hike, crashing surf that thundered as it rammed Mount Desert Island, and tidal pools with all sorts of curious marine life. It was my introduction to the national park system, one I've clung hard to for decades. The parks have provided recreation, amazement, and solace, and a break from the tumultuous events that go on around us. Yellowstone, Great Smoky Mountains, Shenandoah, Canyonlands, the list of more than 400 wondrous places in this country provides us with a hopscotch list of destinations that reveal to those who visit magnificent sceneries, rich cultures, and interesting history. With wild seashores at places like Cape Lookout National Seashore, raging rapids that plunge through canyonlands in Grand Canyon National Parks, serpentine underground mazes in Mammoth Caves, towering mountains that hold up the horizons in the Tetons or North Cascades, waves of dunes, Great Sand Dunes National Park and preserves, and thick forests in the Sierra and North Country, I've yet to find a better landscape for adventure. Within Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the Spanish missions of the Southwest, Jackson's death site at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, and Slavin's Roadhouse at Yukon Charlie Rivers National Preserve, just to name 4 destinations, you can come to better understand the country's rich history. Whether you're considering a lifelong journey to visit every unit of the national park system or simply looking for a weekend escape, you can't go wrong in the national park system. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. So, Kristen, we're talking about furloughs and firings and how it could devastate, not just the Park Service, but the other land management agencies. I'm just wondering, at the same time, there's a lot of backlog maintenance remaining in the parks and other federal lands, and Congress is moving forward with an extension of sorts or a renewal of the Great American Outdoors Act. What good is the money if there's nobody there to use it?
Did you read my testimony, Kurt?
I listened.
That was the theme of my testimony a few weeks ago in Grand Teton. You can't execute a program to that degree if you don't have staff people to do the work. And the contracting folks who could easily be terminated in the next couple of weeks are really critical to making sure projects happen on the ground. For the Great American Outdoors Act, at least for the Park Service, they use a lot of local contractors. They're not necessarily doing the work themselves. They're hiring other people. I have been in parks hanging out with superintendents when they're showing them a project area and getting ready to get bids for them. So I've seen this in action, and if you don't have the staff people to help facilitate the process, it's just not going to happen. And we already know of projects that didn't happen this summer because of the lack of staff people. So it's only going to get worse if they continue along this track. But I think we're making that connection to Congress, and we're saying we need staff on the ground if we're going to make this happen. So we're hoping that the enthusiasm that Congress has right now for funding and extending the Great American Outdoors Act will result in more action on the staffing issue.
Projects that didn't get funded. I noticed that at Big Bend National Park, they put off construction of the new lodge in the Chisos Basin. Was that any idea what the reason was behind that? They couldn't get a contractor to do it, or they didn't have the funding for it?
I think Bob Krummenacher would have a better answer to that than I would, but I'm not quite sure on what happened with the contractor there.
It was just interesting because it's a big project. It's needed, and
Yeah.
they put it off for a year. And I always find it interesting when parks announce that a record of decision has been finalized to move forward with this project or that project, and then there's a caveat as soon as funding is available or identified. Tough times in the national parks. I mean, you can go to any national park and find a project that is delayed or goes begging to get done. I mean, we mentioned Nicodemus. I mean, they just last year acquired, I believe it's the First Baptist Church, and it's all boarded up because they don't have the funding to restore it. I was at Tallgrass Prairie, and they've got that beautiful three-story barn there with windows broken out and plywood over windows. What you would think is minor stuff that could be tackled in a afternoon's work. But there are much bigger projects. A lot of pain out there across the system.
Yeah. That's why we need to extend the legislation, is to get everything fixed. It's really fascinating. And I've spent a lot of time talking to Park Service and other federal agencies about how they spent the current money. And so many water systems were going to fail if they didn't use the Great American Outdoors Act money to fix them or completely replace them. You said you were just out in Yellowstone, Kurt. Yellowstone has benefited probably the most from replacing water systems of any other park unit. But of course it needed updating. It's our oldest park in the system, and they just had that massive flood event that happened that actually made the situation with the water treatment even worse. And so they had to put, hundreds of millions of dollars into water treatment, but this makes sure people have potable water but also make sure that you can flush the toilets.
Sure.
And the sewer systems are taken care of in parks. And I think, at least in the hearing that I was in Grand Teton a couple of weeks ago, these are not sexy.
No.
You don't do a big ribbon cutting. But as you and I both know, you need these facilities in order to keep these parks running. And so, the money had to go toward those kinds of projects. But the reason we need the second round of funding, another, 8 years of funding, is to fix that barn at Tallgrass Prairie, to fix up the church at Nicodemus, and to complete the rest of the projects that are on the list that really need to be fixed. And I think one of the greatest accomplishments of the Great American Outdoors Act is that certain places that have been boarded up, like Hot Springs is a great example of that, underutilized buildings that are historic, many of them are getting a new life because of the
Yeah.
Great American Outdoors Act. And I think that's the story that Congress wants to hear and needs to hear, is that in addition to getting the great water systems done, we're also reopening facilities and reopening historic sites that were damaged and are now getting fixed. So it's such a great bill. It's such a great way to honor the Park Service to pass this bill. just to say we care enough to fix up all the facilities and these buildings and historic sites so the public can enjoy them for generations to come. I always worry about us being the generation that messes things up, but we're actually, if we can pass this new bill, we'll be the generation that makes sure the parks are fixed for the future, which I think is a wonderful part of what we're doing right now in the legacy.
And at that meeting that hearing in Grand Teton that you testified in, also testifying was Leslie Matson, the president and CEO of the Grand Teton National Park Foundation, which has done so much for that park and raising millions of dollars for, the Jenny Lake area, the trails up above Jenny Lake itself, acquiring land so it wasn't developed publicly. And Leslie testified that, our donors don't want to give millions of dollars for sewer treatment systems. This is something that the Congress has to take care of. And I hope that message got through.
I think it did. I think it has to continue to be repeated. But you look at some of the amazing projects that the Grand Teton Park Foundation's philanthropic dollars have paid for, trails, and updating different facilities. They have a really good, robust community up there that puts a lot of money into the park. But not every park has a friends group that can generate that much money. And so I think what Leslie has done is inspiring and wonderful. And, kudos to her and her staff for doing an exceptional job. They have more capacity than so many other friends groups do. And so that's why the Park Service needs the Great American Outdoors Act is because the other friends groups can't fundraise enough to pay for some of these facilities,
Yeah,
be upgraded and stuff.
It's a real challenge. This is a tough time for Park Service employees. I mean, they've always had tough times. Their housing has been substandard in most parks. Their pay, as I understand, is less than that of employees at other federal land management agencies. And now they're going through furloughs without paychecks. They're being asked to work in some cases without paychecks, without certainty that they'll get back pay once the government gets back to running normally. What's going to happen to the Park Service? Why would somebody go to work for the Park Service under these conditions?
Because they love the parks and they believe in the parks. And we're asking a lot of them right now. I know a lot of Park Service staff listen to this podcast, and I think we can both say that we care deeply about you and want you to stay at the agency if you can bear with it. I've talked to so many park rangers in the last few months, and some of the heartbreaking stories that they've shared with me about their mental health and how tough this has been on their family to not know whether or not a paycheck is coming in. It's really hard to be a Park Service staff person right now, and you care so much about your job and you feel so connected to the park that you're working in, and you're being treated really poorly. Not only some of the things that you mentioned, housing and pay, Kurt, but also being asked to list your interpretive materials and say that some accurately researched story about your park doesn't meet a political goal of this administration and it might get ripped down. You start to sort of ask yourself, who am I working for and what am I doing? And so we know that Service staff are under an incredible amount of pressure, and it's not fair. It's terrible. And I feel like you and I have been around for a long time, Kurt, and we've seen administrations come and go. And we know this administration isn't going to be here forever. And we hope in a few more years, things will get better and we can put the Park Service back on track. And I think from my perspective, NPCA really wants to spend some of this time thinking about the future of the parks, the future of the Park Service. And we want to spend some time really planning for the future and figuring out how we can better insulate and protect this agency to make sure that some of these attacks can't happen again. And so I know that I want to spend my time not just in today's chaos, but I want to make sure that we're spending time thinking about the future and thinking about how we make sure the Park Service can thrive in the future. So I think we're just asking people to hang in there if they can, and that we care a lot about you and we're thinking about you and we're also trying to protect your jobs and fighting for them every day. So my hope is that we show this administration that the public doesn't want this and we get them to back off sooner than later, and stop going after Park Service and other staff, and that Congress weighs in and tells them to knock it off, just to give people a breather and some certainty that your job is okay.
Well, and the challenge to those goals is getting people to voice their concerns. I mean, earlier this year in June, I think in May, we had some protests at parks and whatnot, but there hasn't been a lot of protests lately. I mean, at Yellowstone, people were flocking into the park and going to see what they wanted to see, and there wasn't any great concern over the fate of the Park Service. How do you marshal that kind of pushback against this administration that is doing so much across the system, and not just the park system, across the country?
We have to continue to educate the public. We have to put faces on who these Park Service staff people are, what they do every day, why they care so much about their jobs, what they're protecting. I think one of the most compelling things that has happened in the last 9 months has been hearing the Rangers story from the Rangers themselves, and understanding their passion for their jobs and what they were doing for the Park Service, whether it was protecting, visitors, working on cultural resources, inventory and monitoring, water quality. When you hear these stories of what folks do every day to make the parks what they are, I think it's very compelling for people to hear. And I think we need to make sure the Rangers are front and center, and the other park staff, and we need people to understand what they're losing as a result of all of these cuts.
Where are you hearing those stories, Kristen? Because the Park Service employees will not talk to us. Becky Latson, our photographer, was in Mount Rainier National Park a few weeks ago to get fall color photos. And she was out hiking on a trail and encountered two Park Service employees working on a meadow restoration, planting plants, native plants. And she told them who she was, and she took a few pictures, and they answered a few questions of hers. And she wrote up this wonderful story. And I held back on the story because I know that she had not cleared that story with the park communications department. And I asked them, how do we handle this? And they could not come up with an answer. And so I kicked it up to Washington. And Washington basically said, we want to review your story. And I said, well, that sounds like prior restraint. That sounds like censorship. Oh, no, no, no. We just want to make sure it's accurate. And so the point of this story is Park Service personnel have been told they will be fired if they talk to a reporter without clearance from Washington. In the parks I visited in Kansas, they had a sheet of questions I had to prepare and send to Washington before I got to the park. And if I thought of a different question while I was talking to that Park Service person, they couldn't answer it. So I'm wondering where you're hearing these stories from Rangers, because we can't get Rangers to tell us their stories.
Well, I've been around for a long time, Kurt, and so I know quite a few people in the park system. And so
Sure, but the stories are not
we,
getting out to the general public.
I think the Resistance Rangers have done a great job of getting stories out. I think more so in the springtime when people were getting dismissed and fired. So I think there are more drips and drabs now than there were, earlier in the spring. But I think as these reductions in force happen, we're gonna start hearing from people again, and learn what they were doing at the Park Service, and we'll hear more about the folks that we've lost. The other thing you have to remember, Kurt, is the deferred resignation folks. Many of them got paid through to September 30th.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole other set of deferred resignation folks that are going to get paid through the end of the year. So my suspicion, and I've heard this from several people, is that more folks will be willing to talk about their experience, once they're off the payroll. So
Sure.
I do think we're going to be hearing more from people as they come off the payroll.
Well, if you encounter any active or recently retired, we'd be happy to talk to them when complete anonymity.
Oh,
We don't
wonderful.
want to get anybody fired. We want to see
Yeah,
more Rangers back to work.
yeah.
Kristen, before we wrap this thing up, the House is in recess. Speaker Johnson wants to keep them in recess for the near term for some reason. But the Senate is still in session as they try again to resolve this government funding issue. And U.S. Senator Mike Lee from Utah is busy at work.
You're
Um,
always mentioning him.
he's my home state senator.
I know, I know. You've got to get Senator Curtis to knock it on his bills.
Well, yeah, that's another story. But but recently, Senator Lee has introduced legislation with a number of his Senate colleagues to open up wilderness areas to Homeland Security in the name of border security. And just the other day, along with Senator Curtis, which was a surprise, kind of, the two of them introduced legislation to provide more OHV access, off-highway vehicle access, specifically in Capitol Reef National Park here in Utah, as well as a blanket bill that I guess would go across the park system. So any state that wanted OHV access could push for it. What do you make out of Senator Lee and his busy work?
Um, we reject and oppose all of these bills. The border one is fascinating because it's 100 miles from the northern border. This is the Canadian border,
Yeah,
or the southern border. And so, why do we want more roads in Glacier National Park or Olympic National Park? We do not. And so folks need to just shout from the mountaintops that this is a terrible idea. Actually, this wasn't even Mike Lee's idea, if I remember correctly. The original bill was a different member of Congress in a different Congress that was introduced. So this bad idea has been around for a little while, and nobody, you look at this and it's laughable. It's totally unneeded. And if you look at the southern border, and I've been there, and I've been to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, there's already a road along the fence. And so Organ pipe cactus has been through so much right now in terms of resource damage in order to accommodate homeland security. I mean, are you really just going to keep damaging that national park unit and destroy all of the cactus there? So it's a terrible idea. On the off-road vehicle thing, this has been attempted many, many times. And uh, I really caution Senator Lee on his approach here by making this broad legislation that says that you can drive off-road vehicles in national park units across the country if the state law allows it. Off-road vehicles are considered thrill-seeking vehicles. They're, even if they are street legal. And the Park Service has a long-standing policy put in place by President Nixon that says that these are thrill-seeking, potentially damaging vehicles and need to be regulated. And so the roads in most of our national park units are owned by the Park Service. And so the Park Service should determine whether or not a type of vehicle is allowed on their roads, and they should be able to determine whether they can manage for that use. And so, they have been trying to get into Arches for such a long time with off-road vehicles. That's a wilderness park, as you know. And so we don't want thrill-seeking vehicles to be able to go off the main road, the paved roads into wilderness areas. And so it's so frustrating that Senator Lee doesn't put resource protection first when it comes to national parks. He puts thrill-seeking first, and that's not the purpose of the national parks. We protect them because we love their resources and we want to protect them in perpetuity. We don't want people ruining them. And you know better than me, even though I've spent a lot of time in Utah, that there's plenty of places to go run your off-road vehicle around on public lands that you don't need to have access to the national parks. And so I've seen off-road vehicles completely destroy so many areas of southern Utah that were once beautiful. And we've called them over time sacrifice zones, sacrifice areas, because they get completely destroyed. So this is just a recipe for disaster. Nobody wants this. Senator Lee, please stop trying to move these bills forward. And we love Capitol Reef so much. It's one of the greatest national park units in the country. And wouldn't it be terrible if off-road vehicles destroyed the beautiful orchards in Capitol Reef? Don't you want to preserve those, Senator Lee? So I would just say, please stop and let's move on to actually protect places and not destroy them.
That's Kristen Brengel, the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs from the National Parks Conservation Association. Kristen, always a pleasure to chat with you and talk about national parks and get fired up.
Yeah, love talking to you, Kurt. Hope you're doing well.
That's our show for this week. We hope you found it interesting. If you've been visiting parks since the government shutdown started, we want to hear from you. What have you seen? Have you enjoyed your visit as much as you do when rangers are in the field to answer your questions? Have you seen any vandalism or misbehavior by other park visitors? You can leave your thoughts in the comment section of this podcast or send them to us via the contact button on our website. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.